Hello, everybody. I'm Steve, and I'm here today with author Joshua Marsella. Joshua, thanks for hanging out with me today.
Yeah, Steve, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad we're able to get our schedules to line up and have a little chat.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, for people who aren't familiar, can you tell us a little bit about your work and what you've done?
Yeah, I am a Maine-based author. I'm currently my two current works out there are self-published, which includes my debut Scratches that came out last May. It was a novella about a mother and son who move into the mother's childhood home that she inherited from her father who passed away. He had a bit of a violent past, and strange things start happening when they move in and when the son moves into the basement. And that's as far as I'll go with that one. And then my second book came out in February. It's called Severed. It's actually a prequel story to Scratches, and it talks about the antagonist George, who is the mother's the grandfather in the first story. Um, he is a Vietnam vet, and it kind of describes his time in Vietnam. And a lot of people worry because they're not big on like war stories and things like that. And this is 100% horror. It doesn't involve like it's not like Platoon or anything, but there is a lot of camaraderie. It follows a squad through Vietnam as they basically go tracking down this evil entity that's been harassing terrorizing this small fishing village for like over 100 years. And yeah, it's definitely 100% horror. I had a lot of fun writing it, and I do plan on writing a third book, which will take place immediately after Scratches, and that will bring that series to a close. And I'm currently working on a middle grade horror book for the Fright Vision series that's currently untitled, but I should be done with that by hopefully the end of the month. And I also have my debut collection coming out hopefully this fall with Crimson Creek Press. That's called Hunger for Death. I did a cover reveal of that a few weeks ago. That'll be out in paperback, hardcover, audiobook, and ebook. So I'm really excited for that one. That's one of my more ambitious projects. So hopefully you'll pick that up when it comes out.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
that's about what I got going right now. I do have a couple short stories published in other things, but for now that's what I have out there.
So, you mentioned you're working on a middle grade book. How different was that writing something for middle grade? Going from Severed and Scratches to middle grade. Is that a big? I mean, how has that changed your process when as you write that one?
Um, well, one would think that it would be easy because you don't have to deal with real dark themes, or you don't really have to dive deep into that you know disturbed part of your inner psyche. But to be honest, it's been challenging because when you are used to writing for adults and embracing those really dark corners of your mind, it's almost difficult to step back and come up with ideas that you know like almost like go back in time. Like, what did you think of things that were creepy or scary or unnerving? But also, you're not looking to you know destroy the minds of young readers. And I kind of harken back to the days when I used to read like Goosebumps and watch Are You Afraid of the Dark. Um, for me now, watching those things or reading those things, it's nostalgic, and I still get creeped out by them because I watched them when I was a kid. But if you were an adult watching it now for the first time, it may not have the same effect on you. So that's kind of like my thought process with this is I'm trying to revert back to my youth and think of things that were creepy without going into the really into the dark places. And it's been fun. It's been challenging, but also exciting because it's like a challenge for me to push myself and test myself and see what I'm capable of. And writing something without using a lot of blood and curse words and um, gore and things like that. It's been fun. I really enjoyed it.
So have you found yourself writing something and then going back and kind of, uh, reining yourself in a little bit for the middle grade work? Has that been something that you have to kind of look back on it and ease up a little bit?
Um, not really, to be honest. I've been kind of keeping myself in check the whole time. Also, I've been sending over about 3 chapters at a time to the publisher to make sure it fits within his vision, it fits within the age range. I, I have 2 kids that are 2 and almost 4, and I kind of know, what's appropriate. Even though myself, I grew up watching like horror movies at a very young age, like 5 and 6. I think the first one I remember watching was the original Child's Play, back around like '89 or something. I was very young, very impressionable, and that's probably why I'm where I am now. But I know better than to expose my kids to that serious horror stuff, and so it's been fairly easy. But I also know that if something is inappropriate that I've written, my publisher will tell me right away, like, you should probably cut that or reword it or something. So it's been fun, but that part of it has actually gone pretty well, I think. So far, you know, I haven't really gotten any feedback as far as like that's a little too dark. I think it's mostly been going pretty well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Even in your work that you write for adults, do you ever worry about material being inaccessible, or you want to make your books readable for the most amount of people? Do you ever worry about, or just horror in general? Is that a concern for you to make your writing accessible to everybody or to more people?
um, Not necessarily. I mean, for anyone who hasn't read Scratches, that was my debut coming right out of the gate. That one went to a pretty dark place, and I think, yeah, I think people almost appreciate that more than like trying to play it safe. I think people like when you take a risk as a writer, because things these days are so watered down. Everything in the media, movies, they're always trying to play to bigger audiences, and that could be tough as a writer, because especially brand new, because you're not given that wiggle room. You're either going to nail it on the first try, or people are going to like not like everything you did, and they're going to do their best to get you like not to live your dream. And with me, I just kind of do my own thing. I understand if people aren't going to like it, but I don't let that deter me from doing and writing what I want to write. I think that's really important, to stay true to yourself. And if you have a story to tell, no matter how gruesome or distasteful, you just got to tell it, because I mean, that's some of the greater writers of our time. That's how they got where they are. They took chances, and you can't really play it safe unless you just want to be another of the several million horror writers that are out there.
Yeah,
you know.
definitely. And you mentioned you watched Child's Play as a young child, and that's kind of set you on a course. When did you start writing, and when did you decide you wanted to become a writer?
Um, I've always kind of enjoyed writing. In a kid, I had as a kid, I had a pretty good imagination, writing in like English class and stuff. I used to write a lot of poetry, especially like in the military. I did a lot of poetry writing just to kind of get some things off my chest. But I didn't actually start writing. Like, it didn't dawn on me that I could actually write and publish and sell books until just like last year. It was more so like the end of 2019. I went to a few book signings, one with Joe Hill and one with Richard Chismar and his son Billy, and kind of listened to their stories about their inspirations, and then just listening to them talk about writing and the love of writing, really started getting my gears turning. And then I read the Stephen King's On Writing, and that was a really big, that kind of pushed me over the edge to really give it a shot. And I remember telling my wife, hey, how do you feel about me picking up a small laptop and doing some writing? She's like, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, just write a book or whatever. And she's like, whatever, go for it. So I did. I ended up starting Scratches, which was originally going to be a short story and ended up turning into a novella, which I didn't even know what a novella was at the time. I literally just started learning all this stuff last year, made a ton of mistakes, learned from those mistakes, made more mistakes, repeated some mistakes. But overall, I'm really happy with where I've gotten, since last May when I first published my first book. I'm really, really proud of myself. I've really pushed myself and I'm really enjoying it. That's the key right there. Is it doesn't feel like work. It's something I really look forward to every day, or every day I get a chance to sit and write. So really happy with my decision. I think it's one of the best decisions I've made for a long time.
Oh wow. I was surprised that Scratches was your first book because it didn't read like a first book.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no. And I've gotten comments like that. I've also gotten comments like, you could tell the very beginning was a new writer, and then you, like, towards the second half, you could really feel you coming into your own. And I can agree with that. I mean, I've gone through and done a few edits of Scratches to fix typos and misspellings and things like that. And just reading some of the sentences and things that I wrote definitely felt amateurish to me. But what was really important was the story and the characters, and all those details could be improved on. But as long as the meat of the story and the heart of the story is there, to me, that's what's important. Grammar and sentence structure and all that stuff will come to you the more that you write. But if you can't tell a good story that keeps people locked in, then I mean, what are you doing anyway in the first place? All those other things can be corrected, but the storytelling is what's important to me. So I'm glad that it didn't come off as a first book. Feels good.
And writing a horror story, how difficult is that to write a story that keeps the reader afraid, but you don't want to, you don't want to give them too much to where they're overwhelmed the whole time. So how do you kind of structure your stories to be spooky, but not give away too much too soon?
To be honest, that just kind of comes. That's just part of the, like anything else. It's like knowing what words to use, knowing what part of the story you want to tell, because as you're writing a story in your mind, you never know where it's going to go. Like, I started off with the basic premise of Scratches, and it completely took off in a different direction. And I had very little control over that. And that's what's kind of cool about writing, is once you're in it and you're going with a story, and you hear this a lot from a lot of writers, like, I didn't expect the story to take that turn. And it's kind of funny because as the writer, you're driving the car, but you're not necessarily the GPS. You don't know where it's going to take you. You know what I mean? And so, that's what's part of, like, being a good writer, is you have to know what to tell, what to leave out, what to trust your readers, and know that sometimes telling too much or showing too much can be a negative, because you're not trusting your readers to fill in the blanks for themselves. And that's a big part of my style, is to kind of, I think in my earlier works, I showed more than I told. And I started to kind of get away from that and kind of leave things a little more open and let the reader's imagination kind of, take the wheel. Because I feel like especially people that read all the time, they're good at it. They know what they're doing. And, you just got to give them a little bit of trust. And yeah, I mean, it was tough with my first book, because I had been reading a lot of other books, a lot of authors, and it's hard to not. You can take inspiration from something, but it's hard to be original, and it's hard to not, replicate what you're reading or what you're, because there's so much horror out there. There's so many ghost stories or haunted house stories, and it can be tough to not just be replicating something else that you've read or another story that you loved, and because people will pick up on it. Because odds are, if you're writing horror you're writing to a horror audience, and that horror audience, like, they love everything horror movies. There's not much they're gonna miss. So it can be tough to kind of make it original, and that's the biggest challenge right there.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting. Everyone that I've talked to has a different experience getting their work published. What
Mm-hmm.
was your experience getting your work published?
Um, well, I actually am a very impatient person, and that was the biggest deal because I didn't actually know what the process was of getting published, and once I found out, you have to track down publishers, you have to submit, these finished products, and these, they have to be fit their certain criteria or what they're looking for. Like, say we're looking for stories about witches, and we're only accepting stories about witches, and they have to be this many words long, and you have this many days to submit it. And if you're outside that window, we won't even look at it. And it could take up to 6 to 8 months for us to even look at it. You know what I mean? So it was one of those deals. Like, I was like, that's not for me. And I remember I only submitted to one publisher, and my manuscript was probably a complete mess because I didn't know what I was doing. And I think within a few days, like 2 days later, I says no. And I decided to start like looking up self-publishing, and got some tips on that and stuff like that. Started asking people in the writing community and some of the other authors that are involved with self-publishing how to go about it. I watched YouTube videos, and that first thing was like, that was the biggest thing for me, was getting my work out there, was being able to self-publish. And that can be scary too, because there's a lot of stigma behind self-publishing. People, anybody can write a manuscript and submit it and publish it and slap a cover on it. But to, put something out there that's halfway professional and can get people's attention can be really challenging, especially in this like very like busy indie, publishing community. And so that was a challenge for me. And I think I got really lucky with my first book. And once the plan for me was, once to get something out there, see what people think of it. If they think it's garbage, probably throw in the towel. If they like it, maybe I could keep doing it. And that's kind of what happened. Was the feedback was coming in, and people said, I love this story, but it was too short. I wanted to hear more about them. So that kind of got me thinking about maybe I could do some sort of trilogy, because all the pieces of the puzzle were there to have like a prequel, and then even the somewhat ambiguous ending left it open to kind of, if I wanted to, I could either leave it as it is, or I could write a third book. So that's just kind of how it went. And I'm really happy with my decision to self-publish first, because it opened that door for me,
So how do you get people to overlook that kind of stigma, the people that have that kind of negative view of self-publishing? How do you kind of get past that barrier and get your book into more people's hands? Is there are there ways that you've found that are effective in doing that?
Yeah. Right now there's we're like living through the renaissance of like self-published indie publishing. And like, there's so much of it going out there right now and there's so much quality work being put out there that it's not as challenging as it may have been a few years ago. Because it seems like right now it's less frowned upon, unless you're talking like traditional publishing or the big four or anything like that. Beyond indie presses, a lot of people are sort of coming this way more, and even like movie studios and screenwriters and stuff like that are looking at indie publishers and authors, because the work is so original and we're taking risks, and we can, for the most part, put out what we want to put out, and we're not, there's not that barrier of, these editors and publishers that are saying, oh, that's too risque, you can't have that in my, in our books. So, I mean, for me, I mostly I had the cover art, I kind of hyped it up and put it out there and said, hey, I hope you like this book. Luckily, I had a small following at the time on Twitter and and Instagram, because I did a lot of like Bookstagram and stuff, and that was helpful. And I mean, really, I put it all on the readers because they took a chance on me. They were willing to pick up my book. I did send out some review copies, not many, but when I got my first book out there, I had like 40 people bought signed copies, which was amazing. And then people were buying them like offline and stuff. But then once my second book came out, I mean, that quadrupled, tripled. I ended up selling like 130 copies, signed copies for the second book. And it's all just, you have to be confident. You have to like, talk yourself up to not to the point of like, you're sounding cocky, but they want to see that you're confident in your story, your writing, even if it's not perfect, even if not everyone's going to love it. You just have to, because, if you don't have faith in your own work, why should anybody else? I mean, if you're just going to sit there and bash your writing in your own books, why should anyone else take you seriously? And that's where you have to find that balance, to exude confidence without looking, like you're just so full of yourself. Because, if you go too far one way or the other, people are going to be like, I don't really want to bother with this. So sometimes the readers will do the work for you, and they'll be the ones that'll actually like talk up your books or tell you what it meant to you, or write reviews or share it. And that's been a huge help to me as well, especially as a first-time writer. And
you mentioned Bookstagram and Twitter and social media. How do you use social media? Because it can be such a big part of our lives, but can also be harmful in ways that you can get wrapped up in it, and it can be a negative. So are there things that you do personally to kind of use social media responsibly for your own mental health?
Yeah, I mean, it can definitely be a big drag. Not only as just a person, but as an author, you feel like you're constantly competing with all these other authors that are getting more work out there than you. They're getting picked up by publishers or agents, and you're sitting back, working your butt off every night trying to finish this book. It can be really detrimental to your work and to your mental health, but the key is to just do your best to stay positive. Try to, for me, it's a balance of like, I'm an author, but I'm also a human. I'm also a dad. I'm a person. I have a life. Not everything in my life revolves around my writing or my work. So I try to share, aspects of my life, that like my kids and my projects at home and my garden and things that I'm involved in. Because that's always what social media has been for me. But now as an author, you kind of have to have this persona as well, to not like alienate people of a certain group or, you know what I mean? Not, and it's hard because I sometimes I can be cynical. I can be, I have anxiety issues. I have depression issues. I have PTSD. So some days I'm just not feeling it, but it's become such a part of our lives that those things can come out in your social media posts and stuff. Some days I'm just super positive and sharing other people's work and being happy. And other days I just like, subtweet, about other people that are like, annoying me or I don't like somebody. And I don't like to be like that, but sometimes that's because I'm a stay-at-home dad. I'm home all the time with my kids, and I don't really have that outlet to vent to like coworkers or friends or stuff. So sometimes that's what I use social media for, and that could be a good thing or a bad thing. But it's been a great tool as far as being a writer to share my work, get noticed out there, get published. I was blown away when I first started getting responses from authors, even indie authors, when I'd post like a review of their book or something, and they're like, "Thank you so much," and that really just blew me away and was like, wow, these are real people. They're not these giants of, the literary world. They're actually interested in what I have to say. And they're willing to share the reviews, and that was a very humbling experience. It made me want to get involved, and it is another one of those fine lines. Just it can be a great tool, and it can also be your downfall. You know what I mean? If you say something stupid, or even if you're just having a bad day, not everybody's willing to forgive you all the time. So you just got to be careful out there. That's all.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it is. One thing about Twitter, and I was always worried about Twitter because it seemed like a really, like you said, it can be like a minefield if you say the wrong thing, even if it gets misconstrued, and you can offend a lot of people just unintentionally. But I
Hmm.
was surprised on how supportive the writing community there is, because they seem to be really supportive. And even though, excuse me, even though you're competing against each other in a sense, everyone seems really supportive and seems to pump each other up and boost each other. They retweet, book releases and reviews, and it seems really positive. So I was surprised.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of people see it as like a competition, but really, most of us, we know what it's like. We know the struggle. We know the hustle, and you know, um, I mean, a year ago, I didn't even have, I had maybe like 1,000 followers, and the more I've put myself out there to support other people, people recognize that, and they like the positivity. They like people rooting for each other, and that's been a big part of my growth is not using social media just to like rant about politics and rant about all this stuff, because my opinion doesn't really matter to most people. It's just uh, use it for the positive, use it to support other people, and that's been a huge part of me making a lot of friends in the writing community and with authors, and to the point where I call a lot of them my friends now, because they're like mentors. They ask me for advice, they ask me for blurbs, like things like that just blow me away, because I'm so new to it all. But that it's been a huge boost in my confidence.
Yeah.
So
And you mentioned you had some time in the military and you would write poetry. Was that therapeutic for you during your time in the military to write? Was that an outlet for you?
yeah, I've always been a pretty like deep thinker on the inside, but on the outside, because I've always dealt with like depression from a very young age, and but I didn't like to show it unless it was like really, really, I was really having a bad day. So I've always been like kind of a clown, like a class clown, almost like Robin Williams. Like his whole thing was, he's always goofy on the outside, making people laugh, when on the inside it was just like this inner turmoil going on, and
Yeah.
this self destruction, and that's very similar to how I've been, especially in school and stuff, and even in the military. I didn't take very seriously. I was a good soldier in the sense that I would do what I was told, but I was always questioning everything, and it wasn't a really good fit for me. So sometimes I would just be like sitting back uh, in my room, or back in my bunk or something, and just start jotting down things about what I was seeing around me, and a lot of it was like very like empathetic. I was in the Middle East from 2004 to 2005, but I wasn't for the war. I was very much against the war in Iraq, and it was hard for me because I joined the military to kind of to get an education and to do all these things, not expecting to be deployed. Um, and it's like 7 months into you know my service, I was deployed for a year to the Middle East. So
Hmm.
that plan didn't really work out that well, but it was a good outlet for me to talk about things that, not that I wasn't comfortable talking about them with other people, but it was more so like just getting things off my chest. And it didn't have to necessarily be about the war. It could have been about like love, or it could have been about my childhood, or anything like that. It kind of goes all over the place. And yeah, it was a great release for me. And I've even when I was in like high school and stuff, I used to love writing poetry. I think it's rooted in like my love for music and my love for like lyricists, and like I was a big fan of the Doors. I was a big fan of hip hop, and like, you know, the lyricism that they use, you know, classic rock and some of their poetic, uh, the language that they use in their songs and the metaphors and stuff. That stuff always really appealed to me. So um, that's why I use a lot of music in my work and my stories now. Most of the, you know, a lot of my stuff has mentions of a song or two or something of that nature, because that's always just been a big part of my life. And yeah, I think that's where that comes from, is just a love of words, a love of music. Um, yeah, so I think that's definitely, it could be therapeutic for a lot of people just to get some words out there and express yourself. You know, it's like your own like therapy session. You know,
Yeah.
except it's free. Just
Yeah,
buy a piece of
exactly.
paper and
Exactly. And during your time with your time in the military, how has that changed your writing process, or just your the stories you write? Has that had a big influence on what you wanted to write about?
um, yeah, I mean, you know, like most people, when you get older, you know, you have this perception of the world and of life, and it's really like full of like, when you're younger, you're full of aspirations, and you're full of like, what, you know, what does this world have to offer me, and what can I do in this world? I have my whole life ahead of me. And you know, I was like, I don't know, 19, 20 when I went into I was 18, and then by the time I was in the Middle East, I was around 20, 21. Turned 21 in Iraq.
Mm.
I came home, and my whole perception on things was very different. And you know, you if I had been writing consistently, you know, it probably would have taken a much darker tone than before. Whereas I was writing about like, oh, the, you know, the peace that the world could experience, and all these different things, to the point where it was like, you know, this is what we're doing. Like, because I even remember some of the poems was like just talking about like some of the atrocities we're committing and things like
Mm.
that. And it was very amateurish stuff. It's nothing like real deep, but it was just about dropping bombs on people and things like that. And uh, you know, killing mothers and their children and for no reason, for oil and things like that. And whereas before it was like, you know, rainbows and peace and love, and because that's what my experience was like overseas, was just, you know, you see the things that we're doing, and we're, you know, supposedly the good guys, and it's hard to fathom that uh you know, you could be a part of something that maybe isn't all that good, all that positive, isn't creating peace in the world like you think it is. And so yeah, I mean, it was a huge shift for me, consciously. And yeah, like, you know, and it happens to a lot of people. I mean, even like, and that's the thing. What's nice about writing is like, even Tolkien, I believe he was in, I think it was the First World War. Um, you know, his whole the whole Middle Earth and you know, Lord of the Rings saga was a lot of it was based off of his experiences in the war.
Mm.
And it's really interesting when when you like research it and stuff, because he you know, he took that experience and turned it into something, you know, magical and amazing. And you know, some people, they turn that into just, they just drink, or they take drugs, or they you know, they harm their bodies and stuff. So it's nice when somebody can take an you know, an experience like that and turn it into something that, you know, people can appreciate. And it's not easy though, for sure. It's it can be a struggle. But yeah, no, it's definitely it definitely changed me quite a bit. So,
Yeah.
you know, especially early on. So it's gotten a lot better since I've gotten older. Like, even with like, um, I couldn't watch certain horror movies for a long time when I got home. I would have like severe panic attacks. Like all throughout my whole 20s, I avoided certain types of movies because I knew like it was going to like trigger a response from me, um, which is interesting because as a horror writer, you know, you think like, oh, these people are just, they love blood and guts and gore. And it's not always the case. A lot of horror writers deal with a lot of trauma and things that they've experienced in their life, whether it be their childhood or war or abuse of any kind or and stuff like that. And that's why they take on this genre, because it's kind of a release for them and almost like a way to, uh, you know, get their story out, or some people use it to live vicariously through their characters. You know what I mean? And they're able to find some healing that way, which is pretty nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something that I've talked with Richard Nell, and he writes dark fantasy, and we were talking, we had chatted a little bit about, um, you know, the violence and everything in dark fantasy in his stories, and we talked a little bit about no matter what somebody creates in a book or a movie, what's happened in real life is always worse. You know, you look through history, and anything that anyone can create's worse has happened because it's real. It's, you know, so I think it's interesting that, you know, and especially at such a young age to see those kind of things, it must be really tough to come back to normal life after that. Um, what are some of the things that you've done to to try and feel a little bit better, and not and not be able to watch certain movies or you know, certain material? How have you, what are some of the tools that you've used that someone else may be able to use that's experiencing the same thing to try and process what's happened, or try and feel better about it, I guess. And I don't know, you don't ever feel better about it, but to try and live your life.
Um, Seek help is really the biggest thing. I've been going to therapy at the VA since like around 2006, off and on. Um, Live each day, as it, as just one day. Don't think too far ahead into the future. Try not to dwell on the past. Find positive people in your life, and try to root out the negativity. If certain things are triggering to you, avoid them at all costs. I mean, it's one thing, if you love something and you keep going, even if it's like traumatizing to you, and you keep going back to it, you're just re-triggering those negative emotions and memories and stuff inside. Um, I found ways to, kind of calm myself down. Like I play music. I started playing music almost while I was in the service. I started playing guitar, and then when I came home, it almost became like obsessive. Like I bought a drum set, pianos, just different instruments, guitars. Started playing with a couple bands, and that was a real big release for me. Some people like to paint. I dabbled in painting over the past few years. I really enjoy it. Anything you can do, fishing. I mean, toss a ball around. It doesn't matter. Gardening. Anything you can do to keep your mind occupied. The worst thing for a person that's like experienced some sort of trauma is to just sit stagnant and have nothing to do, because that just leaves your mind. Your mind is going to go where it's going to go, and whether you can get together with friends or for me, it was a lot of like the past 2 years. I've been reading a lot. Like I used to not be able to read because I could read, but I had really bad like ADHD and I couldn't focus on things. I eventually got medicated in 2019. I went to the VA and said, look, I can't do this by myself anymore. I need some sort of medication to help me get through this. And they got the nail on the head this first time, because I tried stuff way back in like the mid 2000s that didn't help. But this time they finally found the right medication for me, helped with my focus, helped with my depression and anxiety. Because for a long time, I was just like this tense. I had this tenseness in my chest, like something was going to happen all the time. I couldn't enjoy my kids. I couldn't enjoy my family, my wife. I always worried about stuff. I ended up stopping. I quit my job that I went to school for like 6 years for a bachelor's degree, and got a job, and it was just too stressful for me. I was too much anxiety. Ended up quitting that, and So then I became a stay-at-home dad, and but I also noticed that I was losing my cool with my kids a lot. I didn't have the patience. I wasn't like present for them. So finding the proper medication for me was a huge part. And I mean, I'm not big on like pushing medication on people, but sometimes it's really the only thing that can help. Uh, and it's a tool to work with other things as well. If you have a hard time focusing and stuff, sometimes medication can give you the right chemical balance to be able to do things that you love. You know what I mean? That's what happened for me. I mean, shortly after I was medicated, I started writing, and it helped me find this path that I may have never found before because I was too anxious I couldn't focus. So yeah, those are just some of the things that I've learned for myself over the years, and definitely recommend people try.
Yeah, I'm sure that'll be helpful for anyone who's experiencing the same things, and um, it must be really daunting to just kind of get started with that process. It must be tough to take that first step. Seems like.
It is. I mean, it's almost like you have to want it for yourself. You can talk to other people and try to get advice and stuff, but it's almost like a addiction. Unless you're ready to do it yourself. Um, I mean, you're always going to find a way to convince yourself that this is okay. I can do this. I'm still, I can just do a little bit here and there. It's the same thing with mental health struggles and stuff. If you're not willing to really put yourself out there to really get the help, because after you deal with something for a long time, like depression and anxiety, it becomes a part of your life. It becomes like you're so used to it. It's like when it's not there anymore, you're just like, whoa, I feel happy today. Like the happiness and enjoying the moment feels foreign to you. And it's like, what's wrong with me? I feel happy today. Whereas opposed to like, you get comfortable with the dread and the sadness and you know what I mean? Like it's very bizarre, but you want to get on that other end of the other side of the fence where like every day you're feeling good, you're feeling happy. Um, and when you're feeling down one day, you can be like, okay, I'm just having a bad day. You don't want that to be the norm.
Mhm.
And that's what living with depression and anxiety and stuff can really be like. And it is hard to focus on anything. It's hard to enjoy anything. Um, so again, you're trying to find that balance of between the two different sides, and you know, uh, yeah. So get help, talk to people, you know, find something to do, find something that brings you joy in your life.
Yeah, I'm glad you found some outlets to try and keep your mind occupied and that you're
Mm.
feeling better. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to segue off of some such a tough subject, but um, what is it about horror as a genre that appeals to you? Because horror is um, usually associated with negative things, but and I'm a fellow horror lover, so I'm always curious what is the appeal of horror to you as a writer and as someone who watches horror movies and reads horror books.
Um, I think it goes back to you love what you love, and I mean, I've always enjoyed creepy, you know, things like I mean, even as kids, we grow up, we like hearing creepy stories around the campfire. We like watching scary stories or watching scary movies. It's a rush, it's a thrill, and part of it is you know it's fiction. You're reading something that isn't happening to you, and it's this like human instinct to just you know you get that rush of adrenaline, but you also know you're going to go to bed in your own bed that night and you're going to be safe. And I think we're all drawn to the unknown, the possibility of what's out there, and the types of horror that really I'm not big into, although I sometimes write about, is like real life horror, things that are traumatizing to people. Um, when it's done well, I like it, but it's also sometimes it's too real for me, and it's too, you know, these things are happening to people every day. I like ghosts and spooky things like that, and that to me is, like Pennywise the clown and it and things like that. I love that kind of stuff. That was fun to me. What was disturbing to me, like in it, was like the parents, the neglectful parents, or the abusive parents, or the kids, getting bullied by the Henry Bowers gang. Those things were more disturbing to me than anything Pennywise could have done, because those things are real. And it goes back to like the Stephen King quote about, he writes about monsters, but sometimes people are the monsters, and you know what I mean. But I don't know, I love horror. I think it's fun. It's a rush. It's an escape, and most of it can't happen, and that's what's so fun about it. I just like the creepy crawly. I grew up with the Goosebumps books, the Goosebumps show, Are You Afraid of the Dark? So it was kind of rooted in me. And then, I was also watching like Stephen King movies, at a really early age when they were on cable TV. And I remember being a kid and having seen like Nightmare on Elm Street and stuff. And then I try to go to bed at night, and I'd lay in my bed with my light on, crying my eyes out, because I was so scared to fall asleep, because I knew Freddy Krueger was going to come get me. And that's when it becomes kind of like, probably shouldn't have been watching that stuff. You know what I mean? I had a young mother, and she had 3 kids, and it is what it is. It was the 80s, but
Yeah.
that's when it can become a problem. But there's plenty of like horror for young kids out there and stuff that I think is way more appropriate. You don't want to traumatize your kids, or you know what I mean? And then maybe you do. Maybe that's what gives us modern day horror writers. You know what I mean? You never know. But it's just a great genre. I just love it. I love the goosebumps and getting, chills, and sometimes I just sit there at night and watch, like, even though most of them are fake, those like YouTube videos of creepy things caught on camera.
Yeah.
And just that sensation you get of like the goosebumps crawling all over your skin. I don't know. I just love it. But sometimes it can be risky too, because, having dealt with trauma and things like that throughout my life, you're taking a risk of being triggered or seeing something that's too much. And you never know. Like I went to see the second It movie with my wife just before the pandemic. I think it was 2019, and we were in the theater, and there was a really violent scene at the beginning, which is in the book, with Adrian Mellon, and like he's getting beat up, and that was hard to watch because it was realistic. And then all the CGI Pennywise stuff is silly and creepy. But then later on, there's a scene where Eddie gets stabbed in the face by Henry Bowers, and it completely came out of nowhere and caught me off guard. And I was triggered, and I started like getting like sweating. My heart rate was pounding, and I was trying to just calm down and sit back and relax. And I told my wife, like, honey, I'm going to have to go to the bathroom real quick. And she could see like I was like pouring sweat. And I went to go to the bathroom, walked out, and I'm walking down the hallway by myself to go to the restroom there at the theater. And next thing I know, I'm waking up on the lobby floor. I passed out cold, and I tore my ACL in my knee.
Oh,
and
no.
the people at the theater didn't know what was going on. They're like, is this guy on drugs or what? And I told them, like, I'm a combat vet. I have PTSD. Something in the movie triggered me. And I've never passed out cold like that. But I actually, I did. I fell right on the floor. And they ended up giving us like a free movie pass. But even something silly like that, you just never know like what's going to set you off. So it's like you're walking in a minefield, when you have like PTSD or something and you love a genre, especially in a book. You never know when something is going to like set you off. So you got to be very careful. And if you feel something coming on, you just got to set it down or press pause and walk away and calm down a little bit. And, look at some pictures of puppies on your phone or something, because
Cats on Instagram or something.
yeah, cat's the gram.
How do you write about those kind of those real life horrors in your own work? How do you is there a line that you won't cross, or how do you write about those issues but still you know be respectful with them?
Yeah, it's it's tough. You have to try really hard. Like, I know there's a couple genres out there that don't hold back. It's like extreme horror. They're all about the shock value and making people like sick to their stomachs. I'm not that kind of writer. I like to leave stuff to the reader's imagination. I'm very careful also. Like, even in my first book, without spoiling anything, there's some traumatic things come up to one of the characters that they experienced when they were younger, and I could have gone in to all you know the awful details about what happened, but I tried to hold back a little bit, and you know and and write it in a way that was not for shock value, but more so to just from that person's experience. You know what I mean? It's hard to describe it without saying what happened, but
Mhm.
yeah. So it's tough to be able to, because I'm not into that. Sometimes it's fun to read it, like the extreme horror type stuff, but I I'm very careful about, because I don't want to like come off as I'm just trying to write something that's uh, just for shock value. It has to fit the narrative of the story. It has to, you know what I mean? Like, it has to be part of the story, not just I'm throwing this in. I've read a couple things like Richard Lehman. He's passed away now, so I don't feel bad. But he in one of his books, he included this really awful abuse of a young girl. It was very descriptive,
Hmm.
and it continued throughout the whole book. It was like this side plot, but it didn't serve a purpose, an overall purpose, except for to shock the reader. And that was like his first book ever, I think. And it it was very distasteful to me. And I'm not like a soft person necessarily. Like, I can handle stuff, but that was just too it was just drawn out, and it was unnecessary. It didn't fit the plot of the book, and I came very close to not finishing the book because it just felt too gratuitous and like unnecessary. Um, but if something was happening and it was part of the book and part of the narrative, that's a completely different story. Like, I don't mind if it's there. Um, you know what I mean? But because I understand this is the genre that I read a lot of. But yeah, for my own stuff, I try to be very careful. Uh, I use ambiguity. I like to just write a little sentence that implies what happened without
Hmm.
necessarily going through the gory details, especially when it comes to like abuse and things like that. But sometimes I don't mind describing like uh, when somebody's like stomach is cut open and the stuff was falling out. I don't mind that kind of stuff because that's, I don't know. It's kind of weird, this weird thing. But when it comes to like abuse and stuff like that, I'm very careful about how I approach that, because that stuff is very, it's a lot of people experience. It's one of those real life things that, you know what I mean? Not many people are going to have their guts spilled out, you know what I mean? But a lot of people do experience traumatic things when they're children or when they're older. And I don't want to hurt anybody when they're reading my books. You know what I mean? That's
Yeah.
not my goal. My goal is to creep people out and maybe scare them a little bit, but not to hurt them in any way, physically or mentally. So that's kind of the way I approach it. Which it can be tough writing horror and being original, um, finding things that people are scared of without traumatizing them or something.
Yeah.
Some people go for that. They want to traumatize people, and that's fine. And that's everyone writes in their own style.
Yeah. Well, what you're referring to in scratches, I thought was really well done. That and that ambiguity made it even even creepier because there was enough to know what was happening, but it wasn't over the top and it wasn't
Hmm.
too much. So I thought that was you. We walked that line pretty well on Scratches.
Yeah, thanks. And that, that came, it's pretty much the way I wrote it, but I also have my wife read everything that I write. Most of the stuff she's read before anybody else. And I take her feedback seriously. And if she was to tell me like, that, I wouldn't have included that, she kind of had the same reaction that most of my readers do. Like, wow, I didn't see that coming. Or, that was well done. I didn't, not only did they not see it coming, but it changed the whole perspective of the book and some of the characters and stuff. But it wasn't like, that was disgusting, I didn't want to read that. You know what I mean? And that's where I go for, like shock value without it being like, oh, they just threw that in there. Like it had a point in the story, and
Hmm.
it builds character. It's part of a character arc. You know what I mean? That's what was important to me. So I'm glad that it worked for you, and it seems to work for most of my readers. And that's a big part of like what made my story stand out like among people is, it's the character arcs. It's not like the spooky guy, in the background of the story. So
Yeah.
that's nice to hear.
Yeah. And now that you're writing full time and you're a stay at home dad, how do you balance all your time with your kids and with your marriage and with your life? How do you balance your time writing and everything else you have to do?
Um, well, my kids go to bed at like 7 o'clock at night. Most nights I try to do a little bit of writing, whether it's a couple hundred words, or like this middle grade book I'm working on. I've been actually trying to bust out a chapter a night, um, because it is a little more laid back. It's a little more. It's not as I'm not writing for adults, so you don't have to
Mhm.
use like nuance and big words. And I mean, half the time I'm just looking up definitions of words on Google. You know what I mean? You think you know what a word means, and then you look it up, and you're like, I've been using that wrong for like 30 years. But so this one's a little easier because you're not trying to use really big, flashy words. But no, I try to get in at least an hour or two a night. I don't really do any writing during the day. My kids just would not let it happen. And when you're writing, you really want to get in the zone. You really want to try to go with few interruptions, which is still challenging because my kids' bedrooms are right behind me and right over here, and sometimes they wake up, or sometimes they don't want to go to sleep until 8 o'clock, or they want to sit here with me and watch me write. It just so it is a struggle, but I do the best I can. I write as much as I can, um, and so far it's worked out pretty well for me. I think I'll have about three three books published this year,
Hmm.
and a short story that I actually wrote last year that'll be published in an anthology, which I'm pretty excited about. So, I mean, if I can do it with the little time that I have, most people should be able to find time. And that's the thing is, if you want to do it, you'll find the time. You'll prioritize it. It's a balance between writing and reading for me. I read a lot as well because that's a big part of writing, and growing as a writer, and finding inspiration. So at nighttime, I'm either like listening to an audiobook, or I'm reading a paperback, or reading a Kindle on Kindle, or I'm writing. I really don't do much else. Like if I'm working outside in the yard, I'll try to listen to a audiobook or something. So I'm constantly having words coming at me from one way or the other. Um, Kind of annoys my wife sometimes. I'll be cooking dinner and I'll have an audiobook going, and she's like, why can't you just like put on some headphones or something? And I'm like, oh, I like to listen. So, but it's great. It's my kids, they kind of know. Well, my oldest son, they love books, they love reading. I think it's going to be good for them to see, you know, my wife and I are always reading something, and dad's always writing stuff and publishing books, and I think it'll be good for them to see something like that, someone driven and following their dreams, and
Yeah.
um, So, and as they get older and they get in school, maybe I'll be able to have more time if I don't go back to work full time right away. This could end up being my full time job. Who knows? It all depends on, what how these next few books come out and my future books, and I'm trying to get better and better, and keep moving up the food chain every year. So, so far I'm pretty happy with what I've been able to accomplish.
Yeah.
But yeah,
You're doing really doing for being a first. You just started writing recently, so you're doing
yeah,
pretty well.
yeah.
Things are
Thanks.
going pretty.
Yeah, I'm just a little over a year in, um, and I'm just blown away by some of the things, like, like picked up my collection was picked up by a publisher, and my debut book. I have an audiobook in the works right now for Scratches.
Oh
Also,
wow!
there's also a screenplay being written by a small studio uh, of Scratches. So
Really?
yeah,
Wow, that's
that's
awesome.
that's very exciting. It's a small publishing company, uh, production company, and it's run by a family. The Jeremy Ray Taylor, he's the young kid who played Ben in the It movie. It's his family, and him, and they're all like extremely talented. They're all doing something, and the mother like runs the company. Jeremy's like a director, and like the siblings are writers, and yeah, Chris Kaiser, Jeremy's older brother, is actually we're working. I basically gave them the rights to Scratches. They're writing the screenplay, and we're kind of right now going back and forth on adding some additional scenes to kind of embellish, elaborate on the story. Make it like, because it's kind of almost like a movie when you read it now, but
Mhm.
you want it to be like a movie length. So there's certain
Right.
scenes that I'm trying to, add into it and stuff. So that's been pretty exciting. And I mean, doesn't mean it's going to be a movie someday, but it just means we have a product that we can, uh, reach out to like investors and stuff, and production, and all these other people, to see if anyone's willing to invest in this movie, which is really exciting. I mean, that's like every writer's dream, is to have their movies, their books become movies. Especially with horror, because horror movies are hot right now. I mean, we got so many
Yeah.
good movies coming out. It's really exciting. Some of the best horror movies coming out are from small, small production companies. So it's exciting. Hopefully something comes of it.
Well, that's great to hear. I'm really excited about
Yeah,
that. That's
yeah, that'll be
fantastic.
fun.
Well, for being a relatively new writer, that's a huge accomplishment to have someone take it. Someone taking a look at it and have that being adapted. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, my hope is to someday be have an agent, and my hope is to just you know get beyond these subbing, what they call submitting stages, where you want to get your story out there, you submit, and then they read your story. If they think it's good, I'd rather just be a name that is consistent with quality, so that they'll want to be like, oh, well, I'd like to reach out to this guy to see if he wants to add a story to this collection, or
Yeah.
let us look at your upcoming book. And that to me is like, that means I've made it, to, in my opinion. Like, if people reach out to me and ask me they ask me to see my work, rather than me, like, you know what I mean, like, hey, can you guys pick up my book, or do uh, that'd be nice, like a Stephen King or somebody that just like, oh, I just wrote this short story, let's $10 million budget, and let's turn it into a movie, you know what I mean, like
Yeah.
tomorrow. That would be
Right.
amazing to get to that point. But you got to shoot for the stars when you're in this, this line of work here. uh, but also, just having a couple hundred readers loving my stories is also, that's a success to me as well, you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, so
So have you had any newer writers or people who wanted to get into writing? Have you had any of them come and ask you for advice? And if you have, what have you told them?
um yeah, I mean, a lot of newer writers have reached out, or even some that like have been doing a little longer than me, who haven't had much success with like reviews and stuff. Because one thing, it's one thing to get sales and sell some books. It's another thing to get people to actually review your book. And
Hmm.
I've been lucky with Scratches. People, when they read it, a lot of people have reviewed it. And, you know, when you look on Amazon and other places, it's like, wow, like people are actually reviewing this book, and that helps sell books when they see a couple hundred people have read it and reviewed it, as opposed to like, oh, 3 people gave this book 4 stars or something. So that all helps. Also with algorithms and for like visibility online.
Hmm.
So people have like commented like, hey man, how do you get so many reviews for your books and things like that? I mean, a lot of it is luck. A lot of it is, you know, self-promotion. Lately I've been really lacking in that area. You know, you kind of get like bored of talking about your own work a lot. And but for the first year or so, I did do a lot of that. And also like whenever someone shares a review of my book, I try to like, you know, retweet it or share it somewhere. um, I'm not big on asking for blurbs. The only person I've really had any blurbs from was Ross Jeffrey, who was just nominated for a Bram Stoker last year. He's one of my earliest writing buddies, who he supported me from day zero. I mean, before I even had a finished manuscript for Scratches, he was like, hey man, if you want me to, you know, blurb your book once it's done, I'll read it, let me know, and if I like it, I'll blurb it. And I mean, he's been an amazing friend, a mentor, and unfortunately he lives over in Bristol in the UK. So otherwise I'd take that guy out for a beer like once a week, you know what I mean? But
Yeah.
to have people that, you know, come to you, and especially people you admire, come to you for not just advice, but like, hey man, would you, you know, read my book and blurb it for me? Or, you know, I'd like to send you a copy for review. Or can you read this, like beta read this and tell me what you think, if it needs anything else, or if anything is too, you know, if there's too much in there. That to me is a huge compliment, because that means that they know I take my stuff seriously. They respect my opinion, especially being so new at all this. You know, that's a huge boost to my confidence. So yeah, I mean, I've written a foreword for another author for his upcoming collection. You know, that was a huge honor to me. Even like young people, like friends I went to high school with, that read my books, their kids were like, saw that someone from their hometown wrote a book, and then they started writing short stories, and their parents would be like, hey, would you read my daughter's, you know, short story, and would you do this, and do you have any advice for her? I did like a question and answer thing for a young girl in she said, I want to say like middle school. She sent me over a list of questions, and I mean, just things like that just mean the world to me, because you never know who you're going to inspire. You know, I was inspired by certain authors and people, and the idea of me like inspiring another person to follow their dreams, or, you know, anything like that, is just, it's a great feeling, you know.
Yeah. What was you mentioned you read a lot. What was the last book you read that really had an impact on you, or really got to you in a good way?
Oh, see, what have I read this year? Well, I just finished the other day, which literally just dropped today. Only the Stains Remain by Ross Jeffrey, which was really, it was a great read, but it's very hard because it's about trauma, it's about abuse, but it's also about redemption, and it takes you on a roller coaster of emotions. That one really, anything Ross writes really sticks with me. Trying to think what else I've been reading lately. Clive Barker, I read the first Books of Blood. Some of those stories just were so awesome. Chad Lutsky, I read Wallflower, which is about heroin addiction, and anything Chad writes is going to be gold. I mean, that guy, he does a lot of like, he's not, I mean, I haven't read all of his work, but most of the stuff I've read isn't based off supernatural horror. It's based off of real life horror, but he does it in a way that's has so much heart, and his characters, you just really feel for them. And you know, even in their worst like these tough situations they get in, you can see part of yourself in them, and you can see why they're doing what they're doing. And Wallflower really struck a chord with me, even though I've never done heroin in my life, and I don't plan to. But yeah, those are a couple of the ones that I've read recently that really. I'm reading right now Walking Through Needles by Heather Levy, which just came out. I think it was last month. That's been really good. It's definitely something out of my normal writing. It's not necessarily horror, but it's more like it's like a love story, but there's like some like trauma and things in there. But it's been really good. I'm really enjoying it. So I'm trying to like branch out and try other things as well, not just reading strictly horror, because it does get kind of, man, what awful like thing am I going to do, like listen to today or deal with or read? It's just kind of, sometimes you want to change the pace a little bit. It's good for you, good for your mental health.
Have you thought about writing other genres? Have you thought about branching off and doing something else, or is horror kind of your where you feel most comfortable?
Yeah, I mean, I really, I enjoy fantasy. I enjoy sci-fi. I feel like if I was to try writing fantasy, I feel like that takes some skill, because there's so much fantasy out there. It seems like, just like with every genre, I guess, it feels like everything's been done. And you're always trying to like I've read a lot of fantasy over the years. I would like to write a fantasy. I just think it would almost be more challenging, because there's a lot of fantasy tropes, like the young poor boy who finds a sword and he goes off to become a king. It's like a king and he rescues this girl, or then switch it around, the girl's the savior. It's just like I'm not as familiar with that or comfortable with that genre. Whereas like horror can really like tap into a lot of different genres. You can have fantasy elements, you can have love stories in there, you can have all kinds of different things. I mean, it's the same with most genres, but I don't know, I'm more familiar with horror. I think if I was to write anything, it would either be like a thriller or maybe science fiction. I really like the cosmos and space. Like I love the 2001: A Space Odyssey series, that type of stuff. Really, I mean, that's borderline horror in my opinion, because it's like nothing creeps me out more than like imagining the vastness of space and like being out on a spaceship and then oops, we just ran out of fuel. Like I guess we're kind of screwed. You know what I mean? Like that type of stuff just really gives me the creeps. And also underwater exploration type stuff, or just being out on the seas, the oceans on a boat, and whoops, we just ran out of fuel. We're just gonna float, till we die.
Just be there forever.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is creepy. Have you had, or I should say, have you experienced any paranormal experiences, or have you heard of any that have impacted your writing?
I mean, I had one thing happen when I was younger, where my friends and I were supposed to be staying at my buddy's house, who was house sitting for his family that was known. It's like a really older house in the area that was a lot of people had died in, and we were all supposed to be staying the night to like house sit. And all of a sudden, like 3 of my friends got like, felt like uncomfortable, like they didn't want to be there anymore, so they ended up leaving. And then I ended up getting like sick that night, like really sick, like sweating, and almost had like flu symptoms just out of the blue. We weren't like drinking alcohol. This was like high school. And I woke up in the middle of the night and I saw like I felt like there was people surrounding me, like standing in front of me, like these like shadow people. And my best friend was on the floor in front of me. And I'm like, hey man, who are all these people? 'Cause it was just the two of us there. And he's like, what do you mean? And he's like freaking out, like looking around. And because we had like a fire going, and I could just see the silhouettes of people. And I mean, for all I know, I could have been dreaming or something, but it was very real, and he remembers it to this day.
Wow.
And it was pretty creepy. One thing that actually inspired a story that's in my new collection was a woman in my hometown lives in this house, very, very big, huge house that was actually turned into like separated off like into apartment buildings. And her apartment is like 3 stories, and it actually goes up to the attic. And in the attic, like when you go up to the stairs to go up to the attic, they're like very steep stairs. There's a door that goes into the attic that's they always keep it shut and locked, like with like a lock hasp or something. And she says once in a while she could feel a cold breeze coming down, and she'll go and the door will be open.
Hmm.
And she doesn't know why. And then they'll like I don't know what, she's tried different ways to lock it and stuff, and it always ends up being open. And come to find out, when you go in that attic, there's a small, like a closet sized room that was built in that attic. And she found out there's like a window in the room that overlooks like another window that goes outside. And there was a lock on the outside of the door, and it was like wallpapered. And then they used like roof shingles on the floor or something.
Hmm.
But the people that originally owned the huge house to themselves, they were very wealthy, and they had a child. I can't remember if it was a boy or a girl that was intellectually disabled. And back then, it was really frowned upon. It made you like, people thought lowly of you if you had this, child that, you know, whether I don't know if it was like Down syndrome or something like that. But so basically, what they did was they built this small little room in their unheated, unair conditioned attic. And whenever they would have guests over, they would put their child up in that room and lock the door so that they were out of sight, out of mind. And that, and so like she has these experiences, the woman that lives there now, like she honestly feels like it's haunted. She has like all these different things going. And they my friend who's friends with this woman, they invited me over to actually check this out because they learned that I'm a horror writer, and told me the story about it. And man, it's I took pictures, and there's a story in my collection called A Room Full of Toys that is loosely based off of that story. And
Wow.
um, yeah, it's one of my favorite stories because it is based off of a true story that's just heartbreaking, and gives me the chills just thinking about it. Because that, I mean, just horrible to think of a child being locked up there. You know what I mean? It's awful.
Yeah, it is. How long ago was that? Was the child? Um, how long ago did those people live there? Has it been generations or?
Yeah, I want to say the people that originally owned it, this must have been like the early 1900s or something like that. My town is like a river town. My grandparents' house, I want to say it was built in like the 1800s. So these houses go back a ways. They go back generations. And there's even a lot of the original uh, like lighting and doorknobs and things like that. Like chandeliers and different things that are still there from the original house. So I was going around taking different pictures. She was like kind of giving me a tour. She's done some renovations and stuff, but a lot of the houses in my town um, do have a lot of the original, uh, you know, utilities and things like that, just like the lights and stuff. And it is pretty neat when you're able to go into a place like that or hear stories, especially a lot of like going up the Maine coast and a lot of like the coastland of Maine. There's stories about the lighthouses and the coastal towns that, especially like Wiscasset, they do like a whole um, ghost tour in around Halloween time, and they go to different houses, stand on the outside of the house, and they'll tell you the stories and the legends about like the people who haunt those houses and
Oh
stuff.
wow.
So it's pretty neat. Yeah, because New England's very old, one of the oldest settlements in the country. So it's kind of cool to hear these old tales that have been going back. generations and stuff.
Yeah,
It's
lots of
tons
history.
of inspiration. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
you could see why it's like ripe for horror writers to, Salem, Massachusetts, and all that stuff. And there's always some sort of creepy story in all these little towns.
Yeah. I'm sure every town has something, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
What are some of your favorite scenes to write?
um, oh, I don't know. I think it's a good question. I think writing, not necessarily scenes, but like character interactions. I like writing dialogue, that kind of stuff. I know with my first book, there was very few characters, so it was more like writing about the boy's experience and things like that. Those were fun scenes to write, like his experiences with this entity in his house. Those are fun to write, but also scenes where somebody is like thinking or just contemplating the things around them. Those can be fun to write, because it's almost like a part of yourself is coming out. Um, your thought process. And like there's a scene in Scratches where Connor's in the cemetery where his grandfather was buried, and he's kind of just pedaling around, and he sees like gravestones that are with markers that are like for babies, like babies that were buried. And in his mind, he's like, it just takes him to a place where he's thinking about, the awful things, like why did these children die? Why did these babies die? Like, dying is for old people.
Hmm.
Things like that I really enjoy writing, because those are some of my own thoughts. And you don't necessarily, you're not using dialogue, but you're using internal dialogue. And then also, with my second book, Severed, there was some there was a couple scenes where like someone is about to meet their demise, and they're kind of having this internal, this thought process of like back home, away from Vietnam, and some of the things they're looking forward to when they get home and stuff like that, kind of building up to this horrific event that's going to take place. And sometimes those are really fun because you really can get deep into thought. And because a lot of the external dialogue is like, they're just like, it's banter, and it's like, a lot like when you're in the military, you're just calling each other names and giving each other a hard time. Whereas when you're having a conversation with yourself inside, you're more real. You're kind of like, you know digging deep to the things you love and the things that you care about, even if you're not talking about that on the outside. So those are kind of fun to write. Even in some of my short stories or my middle grade book, he has a lot of inner conflict, with this kid, what he's going through, what he's doing in this book. And which is very different from how he's portraying what he thinks of it. You know what I mean? And that kind of stuff is fun to me, because I've always been like a big thinker. Sometimes I just get lost in thought, and my wife's talking to me, and I don't like. I'm not. It's not like clicking in my head. Okay, turn off your brain. So
Yeah.
when I get to write stuff like that, I really enjoy it. And then there's always the creepy crawly, scenes that I really like to write. The actual horror things, you know what I mean, that make the story scary. Those are always fun to get creative and to dig deep and to think what makes me scared. Just things in
Yeah.
the shadows, or that type of stuff is what's really fun. I like that kind of stuff.
Yeah. If you can spend the day with any author, who would it be and what would you ask them?
Um, Great question. Uh, I think, originally I would have probably answered this as, just say Stephen King, because he's one of my all-time favorites. Um, but lately, I've been getting more into Clive Barker, and I I watched an interview recently where he was just getting like hammered with stupid questions from like these teenagers, in like the mid 80s when he's at the height of his career, and he just handled everything so smoothly, answered all those questions that they had with like amazing answers. And I just like, I don't know, I look up to him a lot now, and he kind of just did his own thing, took inspiration but really made it his own. I really would that seems like a mind I'd really like to tap into, and see where he gets some of his inspiration from, because he does a lot of like dark supernatural, really like hellish type horror, whereas I'm more familiar with Stephen King's type of horror, and I'm really comfortable with it. I'm not so I can say comfortable, but I mean more like familiar with it. I'm not as familiar with like the really like blood soaked, dark, like chunks of meat type stories that Clive Barker's really good at writing, and that's where I think I lack in some of my writing, is to take those risks and really go there. So I would love to sit down with him and be like, hey man, how do you get your inspiration, and tell me your secrets.
Are there any novels that you really love but are underappreciated?
Yeah, I think, I'm not sure why, but I really loved Revival by Stephen King. That one really, no one really ever talks about it all that much besides hardcore Revival fans. It felt like old King again, the way he's able to tell a story about, part of it's like this kid growing up and being a teenager and young love, and then it's also about like decay and what happens to somebody as they get older, and it goes to like a really dark place I wasn't expecting, and it opens up doors to worlds I wasn't expecting, and I really just loved everything about it. And I guess another one is which I don't really hear that many people talk about, but Slaughterhouse-Five was a book by was that Salinger? Yeah.
Vonnegut?
Yes, sorry. It's been I literally read it like 10 years ago. That book just kind of blew my mind. Like he just went all over the place. And I probably am due for a rereading of that sometime soon, but that was one of those books that just really like blew my mind at the time. As well as like the whole Dark Tower series by Stephen King. A lot of people are intimidated by that because there's a lot of fantasy. It's like 7 or 8 books long. Some of the books are really thick, but he just really, the whole thing just kind of blew my mind, the way he's able to tie all of his works into this one big universe. It's very inspiring. It's something that I strive to do, even in like the littlest ways, like in books or stories that are completely unconnected, like throw in a little Easter egg. Like one of the stories in my collection coming up has a little Easter egg for Scratches that people who have read Scratches will catch up on. But it's not necessary. It's still completely, different. But little things like that I love. Like he's famous for that, and I know a lot of authors do it, and it's one of those things that I really enjoy. Even in like movies, like I love watching like things you might have missed, and then they'll be like, "Oh, this little thing here is a callback to a movie they did 10 years ago," and I don't know why, I just love that kind of stuff. And the Dark Tower is full of, and it's not just the Dark Tower, but it's when you start reading other King books, it makes the Dark Tower experience that much more like interesting, because you kind of see like, man, this, especially as a Mainer, like this guy from Maine just had this huge imagination and was able to pull this like magical thing out, and it's very inspiring. But it's not. They call us tower junkies because everyone, the people who have read the Dark Tower are just like, we're like this cult of people that are like, you have to read the Dark Tower, But yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of indie books I've read over the past couple, like 2 years as well, that really blew my mind. But yeah, those are just a couple of the ones that really stuck out to me. Um, that I think are kind of underappreciated. So,
A group of us are reading. We're starting the Dark Tower next month, so
oh,
we'll be
nice.
reading one book a month for the next 8 months, I think, or something.
That's
So
exciting. Yeah. See, for me, it took me a long time. I read the first book, which was underwhelming, The Gunslinger. So stay with it. But
that's what I
then,
hear. Yeah.
yeah, but because you gain a much greater appreciation for it at the end. And then I read book 2, book 3. It took me a while, a couple of years, and then book 4, I read half of it, and took a 2-year break, and then actually because it's like a flashback in a flashback, and it was like, okay, dude, like you're killing me here. And then like in 2019, I think September, I just all of a sudden picked it up. I'm like, I'm gonna finish this, and I finished the book, and it pulled me right back in, and I finished the rest of the series. By like I think October, I think I had finished, or maybe November, finished the rest of the 3 books, and was just like that's what kind of like planted the seeds for me wanting to be a writer. Was like, man, you could do anything you want when you write. You can make your own worlds. There's no rules. You know what I mean? If it's half legible, if people can read it, like you can do anything you want, and it just really was inspiring. And I hope you like it. I hope you like your journey. It's an experience, and I'll be happy if I can call you a Dark Tower junkie. You'll be saying long days and pleasant nights, and thank you, sigh. You'll be using you'll know what all those things mean.
All these terms, and we're doing one book a month, and then we're having an online meetup for each book every month.
Oh, nice.
So if you want to hop on and talk to us about it, always welcome to join us.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I mean, what's funny is like they're almost like closeted tower lovers, because there's people that you wouldn't expect that have read it, and they're just like, as soon as you open up that can, they're like, oh man, I love that series. Like they'll just start talking about all the stuff. And I mean, I still think about it all the time. And King does that thing where he includes music in his books as well. And there's certain songs I can't even listen to without thinking of like certain scenes in the Dark Tower and stuff. And that was a big inspiration for me, is not only your words in your book, but also like you're like subconsciously connecting your book to a song. And whenever someone hears that song, they think of your book, you know what I mean? And that can be pretty powerful. It's almost like brainwashing them, you know what I mean?
There's a couple of songs and scratches that I'll always associate now with that story too. So
and I've heard a couple people say that. They're like, oh man, now every time I hear like CCR or the Rolling Stones, I think of that scene in the book, and I'm just like, yep, yes, that was the plan.
Mission accomplished there.
Yeah.
Do you believe in writer's block?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, they talk about it, and I'm sure it is a real thing. For me, if I sit down to write and it's just like not coming to me, I'll just walk away, go do something else. I don't force it. Like a lot of people have this idea that they have to write every day. They have to have this nonstop inspiration. And I just don't stress out about it. Especially because especially as a self-published person, you can set your own schedule. You can do whatever you want. You have like fans and readers that are anxious to get the next book, but it's not necessarily like you're not held to a date. Like even if you say, okay, my book's going to be out by December, oops, sorry, I didn't get it done till February. It is what it is. It's not like you don't have a agent or a publisher pushing you to finish it. You know what I mean? You're at your own pace. But yeah, I mean, I think the key is to read. Like if you're feeling like writer's block, read, watch movies, do something that you love and enjoy. And like there's been times where like one story in my collection, I could not think of how to end it. Like it was so ambitious, and it was like a crazy story, and the idea of it, I loved it. But then I'm like, but what am I going to do? How am I going to end this? And I sat on it for like weeks and I didn't touch the story. And every time I went to sit there and write it, I was like, nothing's coming to me. And then one day I was like sitting there eating Cheez-Its and watching a movie. And it's like, okay, that's what I'm going to do. And it just came to me, you know? Sometimes that's how it works. Like you never know when something's going to like, just a story idea is just going to come to you. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you just never finish a story or, but I think, you know, reading and writing, reading and like watching movies or even like having a hobby is a great way to keep your mind fresh, to keep your ideas fresh. And it's not necessarily like stealing ideas, but, you know, getting inspiration from ideas. You know what I mean? Every writer will tell you, you know, even like Stephen King in his book mentions, if you're not willing to read all the time, you probably don't have the time to be a writer because that's a big part of, you know, staying fresh and staying on your toes, learning from other people, growing your vocabulary, things like that. It's a huge help, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned you enjoy a lot of movies. What's been your favorite movie adaptation?
You mean like from a book?
Yeah.
I guess I would have to say the original Mary Lambert's Pet Cemetery from I don't know, 86 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of those movies I saw early on. Really damn near traumatized me as a kid. It was so creepy. And like even if I didn't really understand a lot of it when I was a kid, like the older I got and the more I watched it, and then I didn't even read the book until I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 years ago or something. No, what year is it? Yeah, probably 8 or 9 years ago. Time is flying, man. I can't even keep track of anything anymore. But yeah, and it was before I had kids, and I honestly think it'd be a lot more difficult for me to read that book now. But that's one of my favorite adaptations. I think they did a really good job with it. I actually went last year and saw they had like a movie. They have on-site cinema, and it's like this company that goes around the country. They watch movies. They screen movies at locations where the movies were filmed. So like Chainsaw Massacre, they'll film the movie at like the house where the movie was filmed, which is now like a restaurant. They did that with Pet Cemetery, and the lot where the actual cemetery was, believe it or not, is actually just in the woods behind a like Elks Lodge or something. And there's like a parking lot, and then there's a little patch of woods, and they just made this cemetery out of like, you know, used materials and stuff like that. And so they held the screening in the parking lot, and because they're like set up for that movie, like the crew all stayed at the Elks Lodge, or it was like I don't know if it was an Elks Lodge or if it was just like a little hotel type deal. But so you could go in the woods and see where the cemetery itself was, and it's only like a few miles away from the house that was the movie was based on, you know. And so that was really unique. A friend of mine, Jess, she works for Fright Rags, which is like the horror clothing and apparel type company. Her and her daughter came up from, I think, New York, and actually found in the woods under all kinds of debris and like leaves and stuff, one of the crosses that was made for the movie. I was like blown away. They found the cross because they, you know, all the pets and things like that. They actually found one and took it home because they went to that screening as well. I was so jealous. I was like, man, I would kill to have that. But yeah, that's such a good adaptation. They stuck really close to the book. A few minor changes, but that's one of my absolute favorites. It was a very long answer, but it's just one of my favorite movies. Definitely a good one.
Yeah, and I hate to ask because this movie's usually panned, and I haven't seen it. But have you watched the Dark Tower movie?
Yeah, yeah. That's like the modern day. I don't know if you remember the ET game for Atari.
Yeah.
How they ended up throwing a bunch of ET games in a in like a big waste spot because nobody wanted it. It's
Yeah.
kind of reminds me of that. It's people try to make excuses and say, "Oh, it's just another turn of the wheel of Ka," and it's just another interpretation. And it was just a money grab. It was just you know what I mean? And Stephen King, he said he loved it and all this stuff, but deep down, he says that about every movie that he's involved with because it's his property. You can't like bash on your own property, and um, it wasn't a good like. It was a bunch of different books mashed into one, and it was Easter eggs for Stephen King books, and yeah, it wasn't the Dark Tower. I'm really bummed that Amazon canceled their Dark Tower series that they were doing. They did a pilot, filmed a pilot that supposedly was really good, and then they like dropped it and decided not to fund it. And I'm really, really bummed about that because that sounded like it had a lot of, they had good crew, a good cast, good people working on it, and it fell through. They decided to not fund it. So
I didn't know about that.
yeah, I was really bummed, but they only filmed the pilot and then dropped it. It had, a couple actors. What's that guy's Guardians of the Galaxy, and he was in Walking Dead. I can't remember his name, but there was a couple big name people involved in it, and they just couldn't get it going. So, but yeah, that movie was a drag. I watched it actually before. I think I was only in like 3 books at the time, and still like it just wasn't. Yeah, it just wasn't anything.
So many talented people on that, and that Matthew McConaughey and Idris Elba, they're both really talented. So it's too bad they couldn't make that work.
Yeah, it definitely is. It's a bummer.
What would be something that your readers would be surprised to learn about you?
Surprised to learn about me. I used to, I don't know. I think I used to cry a lot before I was like medicated. I used to just randomly cry like all the time. I'm a very sensitive person, even beyond like the depression. I would just, certain things would touch me, and I would cry about it, and very weird. But yeah, I'm just an extremely sensitive person. I come off as like nothing bothers me, or like, and a lot of times that's like just my way. It's like a mask I wear. Like I things like seeing people in pain, or even like not just negative stuff, but like acts of kindness, small pieces of humanity you see when people are caught doing good things to other people. But it's not like, I'm not talking like YouTubers that go out and like film themselves giving $50 bills to homeless people. I mean like acts of kindness that aren't deliberate. You know what I mean? They're just someone sees someone in pain and they help them, or someone helping an old woman cross the street and they don't know they're being filmed. Any little thing like that really just, that, I don't know, it just gives me faith in humanity. And because we're just bombarded every day with so much negativity, and we're all meant to be divided and stuff, but I think we're all a lot more connected than we give ourselves credit for, or the powers that be want us to believe we are. And I've always seen the beauty in humanity. So probably just me being a really sensitive guy would probably surprise a lot of people, because sometimes I don't come off that way. But definitely a big softie.
Yeah. Has that gotten worse since you've had kids? Because I noticed I've gotten, those things affect me more as after I had kids. There's certain things that kind of a little more touching after I became a parent. Was that the same for you?
Yeah. And I mean, sometimes I pretend like, my kids just, they drive me nuts and they stress me out, or they did something silly, and, I blow it off. But I don't often talk about like the times where like I lose my temper with my kids, and then at night when they're sleeping, I'll just sit there and I'll be filled with regret, or I'll just watch them sleep and my heart aches for like things that I said or the way I acted. But also seeing other people with their kids and the way they interact, if they're not as like, they're not paying attention to their kids, or you can almost like see how the children are affected by the way their parents act and stuff. And even though I'm not a perfect person by any means, I can feel like the pain of children, because I'm not a perfect dad, but I'm there for my kids every single day. I do my best to be there for them. I apologize when I know I've done something wrong, or if I felt like I hurt them. Not all parents are like that, and it kind of harkens back to my childhood, where I had a single mom with two older sisters, and didn't get a whole lot of attention, and just the pain I felt growing up, thinking like you're worthless and stuff. When you can see that in other children, like children in foster homes, or children just, not getting attention much, or, it does. You just feel a totally different way, because I see my own kids in them, and it breaks my heart. Children, and I've always been like, it was weird because when I was growing up, I always wanted to, like, especially in high school, I wanted to be like a filmographer, because I wanted to go to like poor countries and film like hungry people, starving people, because I felt like not enough people are getting exposure to that stuff, because nobody seems to care. And it was really weird, like this weird aspiration, like, yeah, I want to go and film homeless people. But I think it really like puts yourself and your own life into perspective when you see things like that, like people doing their best. And that was a big part of my experience in Iraq, was seeing these people living in these mud huts, and like they're just living. Those are just like you and me. Like, I live in a home, I have walls and a house and internet. Now just picture yourself not having all those things, living in a mud hut, and you wash your dishes in a river and things like that. Like, those are you and me doing those things, but they're just living their life how they know how to live it. And you know what I mean? They're judged by like, the richer countries, and they're looked down upon. And when in reality, that's all of us. And that, that, I don't know, it breaks my heart to see that. And same thing with the kids, you know what I mean? Like, the kids over there will rush out to wave at the soldiers who have no business being there, but they don't know any better. They're there, living their lives, and seeing my own kids. And, the hardest part is breaking those old, like those habits, or those things that you learned from your parents as a child that were maybe unhealthy. Breaking free of those and not continuing that pattern with your own kids, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And give them the attention and the love. And if they cry, let them cry and comfort them, instead of like berating them, or, you know what I mean, making fun of them. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, having kids really made me see myself for who I am, and I think that's a lot of people. Like, and sometimes you're not always happy with what you see, but you're able to change, you're able to, improve yourself and improve your life. And, I think that's the bottom line, is if you're willing to change your behavior and be the best parent you can be, that's all anyone can really do. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. It's an everyday thing.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
How do you deal with negative feedback?
Originally, I used to it really bothered me. And most of the negative feedback I've received has less to do with the stories I tell, and more to do with like, say, like my editing or the formatting or things like that. And it really bothered me, because, you want to be seen as professional. You want to be seen as someone who's really putting in the work and everything. But a lot of people don't realize that, editors cost a lot of money, and editors, and when it's like writing a book is like an investment. Like, if you don't if you're not rich or you don't have a whole team behind you of like publishers and editors, you're on your own. You got to like seek out these things. And so you try to wear all these different hats. You try to be your own editor thinking I'm going to do a great job. And you're really proud of what you've done. And then you put your book out there and people are like, well, I really love the story. I love the characters, but the editing was really poorly done. And they should have spent money on an editor, like it's really that easy. And it's not, I'm a dad. I got kids. I'm a stay-at-home dad. I don't work right now. So just saying, I wish they would have spent money on an editor. It's easy to say, but it's not as easy to do. You know what I mean? Like not everybody has $1,000 sitting in their bank account that they can just throw away to an editor. And then even then, when you get editing done, I've still had people complain about typos and things like that. So, that's really disheartening. But I think those things bother me more than like, say the story didn't work for me or the writing was amateur or things like that. How I deal with it, you got to really have thick skin to be a writer, and not just to be a writer, but to be published, because a big part of being successful is getting people to read your books and review your books. And I prefer people like to buy my book, read it organically than I am like seeking out reviewers or bloggers or things like that. Like I'm not big on that. To me, I appreciate when someone's like, hey man, I just bought your book out on a whim. I saw it on Amazon. I really liked it. This is what I liked about it. More so than like me hunting someone down saying, hey, would you please read my book and review it and put it on your channel? Because that just, to me, it just feels, I don't know, kind of icky. Although I know it's a big part of being an indie writer. And I did do it for a little while early on, but it really feels good to me when someone's like, I just bought your book and I really loved it. And I can't wait for the next one. That to me, is great. And, sometimes you do get people that were like, I really didn't care for it or whatever. And you just got to push it aside and you just got to keep going. Because, if you love it, you're doing it just to tell your stories. You're not doing it, necessarily for any other reason other than to tell your stories, get your stories out there. And you got to understand that not everybody's going to like what you write. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of authors out there. No matter what author you pick, any author on your bookshelf behind you, you can go on their reviews on Goodreads and Amazon, and you'll see 5 stars. You'll see down to 1 stars. You'll see did not finish. I mean, there's always going to be someone out there that doesn't like something that was written, and it doesn't matter how good the author is. Yeah. So if you're willing to be able to tough it out and just understand that, that's fine. It's just like anything with YouTube. I mean, someone may be like, oh, I didn't really like that video that you put out there last week. It was boring or whatever. And I mean, it's always going to happen. And then there'll be people that, oh man, that was amazing. I really love what you just did. And so, I mean, it's like that with anything, any sort of creative endeavor. Yeah. You just got to be, if you're going to put it out there, you got to realize that not everybody's going to like it, and keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. So if the zombie apocalypse started today, what would be your weapon of choice?
I've been thinking about this lately. Probably I have a really nice walking stick that I've made recently out of like some I want to say beechwood or oak wood. I can't remember what it is. Really solid. I would probably put some sort of spear end on it, because my philosophy is keep them at a distance. And instead of like a knife or a axe or something, you got to, I'd like to be able to keep them away, whether it's just like poking them in the junk or in the head, or keep them at a distance. So any sort of long weapon to me is great. And also with that, you could, doesn't take much to just jab it and get them right in the head with like a long spear. You don't get much spray on you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I've
Sprays
never been one to
buttons.
think, oh, I want a nice knife or a blade. Hell no. I don't want them getting that close to me at all.
And as far as like zombie movies go, do you prefer fast or slow zombies?
um, I guess it depends on the movie. One of my favorite zombie movies was Train to Busan, and those are fast zombies. Those are like running zombies. Um, Slow zombies, I mean, they can be kind of boring,
Yeah.
less threatening, like, "Grrr," and the person's like running and they just trip and fall. I mean, that's just so unrealistic. But um, I guess I'd say I prefer fast zombies just because it's more threatening, uh, and yeah, they're just scarier. Like especially like World War Z with those zombies like crawling over like in piles to get to you.
Yeah.
That just creeps me out.
Look like
I'd have to,
ants
yeah,
crawling on each other. Yeah.
like colonies of ants.
That's a I think feel like that movie's kind of underrated. The World War Z. I thought that was a fun movie. The end gets a little weird, but
Yeah, I recently just watched Black Summer too,
yeah,
and
I gotta check that out.
yeah, season 1 and season 2, and that was really good. It's like unflinching. Uh, it's like it's doing what like I think Walking Dead wanted to do, but kind of lost track of where it was going. Um, and yeah, it's just brutal, and yeah, I really enjoy it. And those are fast zombies,
Yeah, and the
definitely.
first season I thought was um, kind of spoke to a mother's love, what she's willing to do for her child, because she the whole time. I don't want to give away too much for people who haven't seen it, but she's uh she's trying to get back to her daughter, and
Hmm.
the whole journey of that she takes, her whole motivation is getting back to her kid. So I thought that spoke to how far you'll go for your children.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. A lot of heartbreaking stuff happens
Yeah,
in that show. Yeah, it's just great character development, and there's like minimal dialogue in a lot of it too. You're just like watching how people survive, and that's what I
yeah,
appreciate about it. It's not wordy, it's just human instinct, and they make mistakes. They're flawed, but yeah, it's a really good series to check out if the second season just came out. So it's kind
yeah.
of under the radar. It's not like not everyone's talking about it. So
Yeah, I'm surprised because it was. I thought it was a. I'm only 2 episodes into the second season, but it like you said, it does have those quieter moments
hmm
that just and the choices they make don't always make sense, but it's what people would do.
yeah, it's
Yeah,
not like well plotted out by like a team of writers. It's like, what would this person do? You know what I mean? Like no one's prepared for a zombie apocalypse as much as we want to
yeah,
think we are, and you would definitely make mistakes, and you could be following someone for like 10 minutes, and then a few minutes later they're killed off by like either a zombie or a human, and then you start following that next human or that next zombie. It's unique in that sense.
yeah.
Like you get invested in these people just by their survival, and then
Mhm.
I love that aspect of it. I think it's really well done.
Yeah, some great quiet moments when they're just walking around or they're gathering supplies, and it builds that anticipation, and you're worried about something, hearing them or and coming after them. So I'm surprised it doesn't get talked about more. So
I
hopefully
know, me too.
check it out.
It's very good.
What are some of your favorite horror movies?
um well, I grew up going back. One of the ones I've seen the most was the It miniseries from the 1990. I've watched that many times. I loved
Mhm.
it. um More recently, I'd say Hereditary
Mm.
really just stuck with me. That one just kind of caught me off guard. I love that one. I like found footage. Believe it or not, there's a movie called Grave Encounters. It's like a found footage of a documentary ghost hunter style type crew that goes into like a supposed haunted asylum, and they get trapped in there. And uh, that movie, I don't know why. I do not know why. I just love it. It's one of those movies that, like, it's just I like that movie a lot. Hell House LLC is really good. That's another like found footage. I'm a big fan of found footage. Um, as long as it's like not sickeningly shaky camera.
Yeah.
I like them a lot. A lot of the old Stephen King movies, and trying to think. I have a there's a lot of good ones. A lot of 80s and 90s horror. Candyman, the original Candyman. I'm not huge on the sequels. Of course, Jaws is a classic,
Mhm.
which I guess a lot of people consider that horror. Um, and like the Poltergeist and movies like that. The Exorcist was, a masterpiece. Um, As Above, So Below is a more recent one that I
Yeah.
watched, which really I loved. I ended up buying the DVD of that. Um, yeah, and then I mean any of the classic Stephen King adaptations that were like even made for TV ones and stuff. The Mist,
Mhm.
uh, Salem's Lot. Those movies I love. I could watch those any day of the week. Um, so yeah, those are just some of the ones I love.
So you mentioned the It miniseries, and I had talked about that a couple months back that I preferred the miniseries to the movies, the
Yeah.
newer movies. So what are your thoughts on that? Do you prefer the movies that came out in what 2017 or so, or do you prefer the miniseries?
Um, I think just me personally, I like the mini series more. It's nostalgic for me. It's the soundtrack. I actually own a copy of the soundtrack on vinyl,
Oh wow.
because it's just so like it just takes me back to that time period. Um, I loved it. I used to watch it all the time. I had the VHS. Uh, the new one, I thought it was pretty well done. Unfortunately, it was far too much CGI, which Andy Muschietti, he's famous for his CGI and stuff like that. But I think it falls flat a lot of times.
Mhm.
There's certain scenes that I feel like could have been way more effective if they had used practical effects. Um, and that's one of the things about, and I mean, they both have their flaws. Like the second part of the mini series definitely fell flat. The only My favorite part of the miniseries was the scenes when they're children,
Mhm.
obviously getting like getting spooked by Pennywise. Even the flashbacks of when they were children, I could watch like 4 movies of that. Um, but like the second half just seemed like a soap opera. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, and then with the second movie of the chapter 2 there, I liked how they explored like the origins of Pennywise. They kind of took some liberties with it and changed it from the book, but that was always a big part of the book that I loved. So I liked the fact that they at least explored it a little bit. Um, but then like this, the CGI spider,
Yeah.
getting called names and stuff, and uh, that kind of just fell flat for me. But I thought they did good with like the de aging. It was a little uncanny valley in a few scenes, but I thought they did pretty well considering the work that they had to do.
Mhm.
But I like again, I like the scenes with the kids. The child actors did a pretty good job. Um, and I mean, the soundtrack wasn't all that bad in the second movie. I like how they did explore more scenes from the book with the second movie. You know, with the remake. Um, but yeah, I'd have to go with probably the miniseries as a favorite of mine, just because it really affected me early on.
Yeah.
So I may be a little biased.
Yeah. Yeah. Me too. Yeah, I prefer that for the same reasons. I don't know if it's nostalgia or, like you mentioned, the CGI in the movie just didn't do it for me. It just kind of it seemed too by the numbers. It didn't feel like it fit.
Yeah, and a lot of the second movie was like felt like a comedy, especially chapter 2, because you have Bill Hader and the guy that played Eddie. Um, it just felt like comical. And then there was certain things like with the adult Ben, he had the note from Beverly in his wallet, which they weren't supposed to remember each other at all.
Yeah.
Like, but then so how would he remember like Beverly and all? It was just like things that they overlooked. Totally, like that was a huge part of the book and the story itself, and they kind of just just fell flat. Uh, but it did. It felt like a comedy. There was a lot of funny moments that you know weren't really didn't feel like a horror so much that it did like a comedy horror.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of strange.
Yeah.
But I want to say thanks for coming by and chatting with me. And I didn't mean to keep you so long. We just started talking, and before you know it, it's 2 hours in. But
Hey,
uh,
I'm
yeah,
glad you had me on, man. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
yeah,
Really
definitely.
enjoyed
And
it.
for people who want to look for your stuff, how can they find you on social media, or what's the best way to connect with you?
Um, right now I'm on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. You can find me just by tweeting my name or looking up my name. It's right there, just over here actually.
Yeah.
Uh, I don't have any like flashy name. I just look up my name. All and most of my social media accounts have my link tree on there. You can find me on there, which has a links to all my books, paperback, ebook, any short story collections I've been a part of, past interviews, some reviews for like booktubers and stuff like that are on there. There's all kinds of stuff. Um, and also, you can just find me on Amazon. Just look up my name. I have 2 books out there right now, Scratches and Severed. My short story, my Fright Vision book will actually be available hopefully by Halloween. You should see it out there. It's going to be book 11 of the Fright Vision series. And my short story collection, Hunger for Death, should also be out. I'm hoping by late fall, maybe. We're not really sure on the exact date yet, but we're shooting for that right now. It's
Yeah,
with the
definitely
editors right
yeah,
now.
keep an eye
Yeah,
out for that one, and I'll have all the links down below in the description. On I'll have all your link tree and all of your links. So if you're curious, you can drop down there and click the link.
perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you
Well,
so
thanks
much for
again.
having me.
Yeah, really. I know you're busy, so I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, you caught me at the right time, and my kids are both at daycare today, so we had a nice time to just sit and chat. It's
Yeah.
been a pleasure, and I really appreciate you having me on. And
Yeah, I've been wanting to try and catch you, so I'm glad we were finally able to make it happen.
yeah, I'll come back anytime.
Yeah, yeah. Well, don't tell me that because I'll take you up on that. So be careful, Jeff. I always tell Jeff Lane that because whenever we were always trying to chat with him and we're always bugging him, so I tell him, don't tell me that because I will I will take you up on that. But yeah, I
Great.
appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks again.
Thank you.